Because we have a very important panel on marriage that we're going to end up with. And to make sure that you stay for this, we have canceled every channel in your room except MSNBC. We do want to talk about the future of marriage, and we've assembled an impressive panel to discuss this as we close out our day. Joining us is Ryan Anderson, who's from the William E. Simon Fellow in Religion and a Free Society, also with the Heritage Foundation. Brian Brown, Executive Director of the National Organization for Marriage. Jennifer Marshall, Director of Domestic Studies with the Heritage Foundation. And coming back to moderate this panel, would you please welcome Tony Perkins, President of the Family Research Council.
All right, I hope you all enjoy MSNBC. We cannot separate the future of our country from the future of marriage. But the good news about the future of marriage is that marriage defined as the union of one man and one woman still has a future. The Supreme Court ensured that, actually, earlier this year in the case challenging California's marriage amendment known as Prop 8. Now, the plaintiffs, the media didn't tell you this, but what Ted Olson and the crew were wanting to do, they wanted the court to redefine marriage nationwide, and they failed to do that. And so the battle over the definition of marriage can and will continue state by state for the years to come. But unfortunately, the court did strike down Section 3 of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which defined marriage for all purposes under federal law as the union of a man and a woman. Now, that means that your tax dollars will go now to support this redefinition of natural marriage. Now, the redefinition of natural marriage will cost us. It will cost us much more than simply dollars. And that's what we want to talk about tonight on this panel. It'll cost us in terms of the future of our children. It will cost us, as Governor Huckabee talked about earlier, in the price of religious freedom. And there's a price to be paid if we don't protect marriage, but there is a price to pay that we must each pay if we are, in fact, to protect marriage in the future of our country. And so I'm honored to be here tonight with a distinguished panel. 3 distinguished leaders who have each, in one way or another, paid the price to defend natural marriage. And we're going to begin tonight with an opening statement from each of our panelists and then a series of questions. And we're going to begin with Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Tony. Good to be with you. Thank you all for being here. I know you sacrifice your time and resources to spend a couple days here in Washington, and we are so grateful for that. And it's really great to be on the panel with my buddies Ryan and Brian. We've spent a lot of this year together, actually, as we've been defending marriage here in the shadow of the Supreme Court, and we know that we'll be doing so across this land for some time to come. We've called this panel The Future of Marriage, but I actually think we need to start by looking back. And looking back actually about a quarter century, because 25 years ago, there were a number of voices that were trying to say, you know, it really doesn't matter if a child is raised by his married biological parents or by a single parent. They were trying to say that, you know, it's actually a sign of empowerment of women that we see so many single women raising children today. Well, that was only the beginning. We had yet to hear the rest of the story, because in the 1990s, there was a wide breadth of scholarship that was saying, you know, it really does matter for women and for children whether there is a man in the picture, whether there is a marriage in the picture. And we began to have a breakthrough that it really mattered educationally, economically, and in many other ways for children, whether they were raised by their married biological parents. In fact, this was one of the great breakthroughs that led to welfare reform of 1996. Unfortunately, what we learned in the 1990s, many are now trying to ignore. So the question today is, will we be able to have the freedom to define in law the truth and reality that a child needs a mother and a father? Or will marriage policy instead put adults' desires before children's needs? Now, Americans are free to live and to love as we choose in terms of the law. And we have learned to get along in the circumstances when it's not possible for one reason or another for a mother and a father to be together with the children that they bring into the world. We've learned to get along. But we have continued to give a unique status in law to the union of a man and a woman, the only union that can produce children, as a monogamous, exclusive, permanent relationship. Now, we uphold this ideal in the interest of children, in the interest of limited government, and in the interest of America's future. Regrettably, the Supreme Court decisions this summer have made this more difficult. There is no doubt about this. But what Tony said is right. We still have the freedom to define marriage, to defend marriage, to affirm the historic and the reality of what marriage is in our state laws. That is clear. However, Justice Scalia, in his dissent, was very right to say that this freedom is at risk. This freedom is at risk. And therefore, because of that, now more than ever, we need to be ready and clear to explain why marriage is the union of a man and a woman and why that matters for the welfare of children, for the good of our society at large. We need to be prepared to explain to our family, to our friends, to our coworkers, what is marriage? Why does it matter for policy? And what are the consequences of redefining it? And you're going to hear in a minute from one of the best defenders and people to explain that, who's done it across this country, from Ryan. Well, over this summer, this challenge really escalated because we are not now just defending the definition of marriage. We are now having to defend even our freedom to speak and to live in accord with the reality that marriage is this union between a man and a woman. We're having to defend that in our professional lives, like Elaine Huguenin, the New Mexico photographer, in public schools, in the public square. We're having to defend the right to speak and to live consistent with the reality that moms and dads are different and that children need both. And to speak and to live consistent with the reality that male and female are biological realities, that we are created male and female. This is the truth that we now must defend. Because of these grave challenges, we need to steward this moment well. It is our profound responsibility to speak to the truth about marriage. We must make the case for marriage as the union of a man and a woman because of how vital it is to serve the needs of children, to serve the needs of society at large. And we need to do this so that courts and legislatures will respect our right to live lives and speak into the truth that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. And we appreciate all the work that Heritage does on this issue, and you in particular have been leading and been a strong voice in bringing folks together on the marriage, and we appreciate that. We often hear that young people don't care about marriage. This is for us older people. Well, maybe those older people. I'm not there yet. But Ryan Anderson is a voice among the younger generation that gets it, understands it, and is communicating in a very effective way, and we're glad to have him on the panel tonight. Ryan?
Great. Thanks for having me. I will point out I've gotten much more gray hair since I started doing work on this issue, so it will age you. But I've been going to college campuses during the past couple of years. Next week I'll be at Princeton and Yale, and the previous weeks I've been at Boston College, Amherst, Columbia, Georgetown. And what I keep discovering is that the left has latched onto a phrase, marriage equality, where they refuse to answer the question, what is marriage? Because everyone in this debate is for marriage equality. We want the law to treat all marriages equally. What we disagree about is what constitutes a marriage, and why does marriage matter? And what are the consequences if we define marriage incorrectly? So the time that I have here tonight, I just want to answer those three questions. What marriage is, why marriage matters, and what the consequences will be if we misdefine it, if we define it incorrectly. From the government's perspective, they're not in the marriage business because they care about your love life. If marriage is just about the romance of consenting adults, we can get the state out of your bedroom. And liberals wouldn't be agitating to put government in more bedrooms if marriage was just about the love lives of consenting adults. The reason the state's in the marriage business is that marriage is the relationship that unites a man and a woman as husband and wife to then be equipped to be mother and father to any children that that union creates. Marriage is based on the anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on the reproductive fact that reproduction requires a man and a woman. It's based on the social reality that children deserve a mother and a father. Whenever a child is born, a mother will be close by. That's a fact of biology. The question for culture and the question for law is, will a father be close by, and if so, for how long? Marriage is the institution that societies throughout time and across the globe have devised to maximize the likelihood that that father commits to that mother permanently and exclusively, and then the two of them take responsibility for that child. Part of this is also based on the reality there's no such thing as parenting. There's mothering and there's fathering. Mothers and fathers bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. Children do best when they have the love, the care, the attention of both the man and the woman, the mother and the father who gave them life. So why does marriage matter? Because what we've seen during the past 40 years with the breakdown of marriage culture is that the social costs have run high. Marriage is a personal relationship that has a huge public consequence. When marriages fail to form or when they fall apart, children suffer and the common good suffers. It's during this time that we saw the increase in crime, the increase in child poverty, a decrease in social mobility, and just a ballooning out of control of the welfare state. So everything you could care about, if you care about social justice and limited government, if you care about the poor and you care about freedom, is better served by a healthy marriage culture where the state defines marriage correctly than by an unhealthy marriage culture where the state tries to pick up the pieces of broken families with an intrusive welfare state and an overweening police state. So what are the consequences if we define marriage incorrectly? I'll just point to three in the time that I have. The first consequence is that if you define marriage incorrectly, if you say that the union of two men or two women is the same thing as the union of a man and a woman, you're more or less saying that you don't need to have a mother and a father as an ideal for a child. There will be no institution in public life that upholds the ideal that every child deserves a mom and a dad. And when we face the most urgent social problem today in America, absentee fathers, 40% of children are born outside of wedlock, 50% in the Hispanic community, 70% in the African American community. How will the law teach that fathers are essential when it's redefined marriage to make fathers optional? It'll be very hard to do. Second consequence is that there'll be no reason why the redefinition of marriage will stop here. And they've even created new words to show where they want to go next. Because if you say that the union of a man and a woman is irrational and arbitrary, what's special about the number two? And what's special about a permanent union? And what's special about a sexually exclusive union? Because the way that we got to monogamy is that it takes one man and one woman that can unite in the type of act that creates a new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. But once you say that uniqueness of the man and the woman, the mother and the father, is irrational and arbitrary, what's so special about twosomes? So the new term they've come up with is the term throuple. A throuple is a three-person couple. And if you go to the Supreme Court and you say you want marriage equality for the same-sex couple, what about marriage equality for the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet? What principle is left to limit marriage to twosomes once you say male, female, mother, father is irrational? Likewise, another term that they came up with, this was in the Washington Post just a few months ago, was the term wed lease. A wed lease is like wedlock, except it's temporary. Just like you can lease a car or lease a house, why not lease your wife? And the problem here is that divorce is that we have unrealistic expectations, they argue. No one can pledge to live and to love a person for life. So why not have a 5-year marriage contract? After all, if love makes a marriage, which is what the other side argues, there's no reason why love needs to be permanent. Feelings can come and go, emotions can wax and wane, so why not have temporary marriage license? The last consequence deals with religious liberty. What we've seen in jurisdictions that have redefined marriage is that they've then used the force of law to coerce institutions who still believe in the traditional understanding. So in Massachusetts and Illinois and right here in Washington, D.C., Christian-run adoption agencies have been forced to get out of the adoption business because they wanted to find homes with married moms and dads for the orphans in their care. They weren't going to prevent gays and lesbians from adopting from other adoption agencies. They just wanted to run their adoption agency according to their values, and the government wouldn't give them an adoption license. And we've seen stories in different states with photographers and florists and bakers and innkeepers who had no problem providing services to gays and lesbians, but they didn't want to help celebrate a same-sex wedding because that violated their conscience. They didn't want to use their God-given gifts and talents to celebrate a relationship and a ceremony that they thought violated their God-given conscience about what marriage is. And in all of these cases, the government has sided against the religious liberty rights of these individuals. So that, in a nutshell, is what's at stake here, what marriage is, why it matters, and what the consequences are if we get it wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Well done. Our next speaker, Brian Brown, is someone that I have great appreciation for as the head of the National Organization of Marriage. And you've probably gotten a little taste of this today when Ted Cruz was here. There are those who actually don't want us to be able to speak. They do not want to engage in a dialogue or discussion or even a debate. They simply want to intimidate into silence. And what I appreciate about Brian Brown is that he will not be silenced. He has been bold, and I believe he is the man to be running point on the issue of marriage today, and I'm grateful that he's on the panel today. Brian?
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for all of you for being here. That's sort of a good segue to what I want to say today. And I want to speak from the heart, from what I've seen over the last few years in the marriage fight and what ultimately I believe is at stake. Some believe that this is a debate over two sides, two visions of marriage, and that each side is going to have sort of equal access to argument, and that at the end of the day, this is really sort of a live and let live type of debate. We've seen some in the Republican Party say that, well, we're not that sure that government should be involved in this at all. They've made a libertarian argument for the redefinition of marriage. Let me tell you this. Anyone who has paid attention to this fight over the last few years realizes that this is not a live and let live debate. There are two sides to this issue. On one side is the traditional understanding of marriage, which recognizes the truth that mothers and fathers are different and that children deserve the opportunity to have both, and that all children do have both a mother and a father. On the other side of the debate is an attempt to deconstruct the very nature of reality, the very nature of what it means to be a human being, to be created male and female. And it goes further than this. We're now at a point in history when those of us who stand up for this truth about marriage, we're not told to come in to MSNBC or ABC or CNN and have an open and free and fair debate. Typically. Sometimes it happens, but not all that often. What we are increasingly being told is that our ideas, our beliefs, our knowledge of the truth about marriage is not welcome in the public square, that we do not deserve the same right to stand up and speak publicly on marriage, and that when we do, through either our religious organizations, our businesses, or as individuals, the force of law will come down to punish, repress, and marginalize an idea that some believe is against the democratic process of this country or whatever else. That is profoundly wrong. It is not the way that we solve debates that are emotional on both sides in this country. And I want to urge you to, above all else, refuse to be ashamed for the truth that you know in your hearts, that marriage is by definition the union of a man and a woman. Refuse to accept second-class status, that somehow you don't have the right, whether it's in your business, whether it's in conversation, to stand up for this truth. This, I believe, is the future of marriage. That if those of us who know the truth about marriage are willing to speak lovingly but boldly the truth that we know in our hearts, that we know through reason, that we know through faith, that ultimately others who in their hearts know this truth, but for whatever reason, whether it's been the years in academia, whether it's been the indoctrination that we see when we turn on the news, whatever it is, they will come back to this truth. This is written on the human heart, that there's something different about moms and dads, that kids deserve both mothers and fathers. This is written on our hearts. And what we need are people who are willing to stand up regardless of the names they're called, regardless of the threats that come, regardless of whether supporters of redefining marriage take their 990s and post their names on the internet or whatever else. What little are we being asked to do? If we look back at those before us who stood up for the truth, Christians and others through the civil rights movement before, all we're being asked to do is to stand up for the truth, not be ashamed, not be intimidated, and to do what we know is true in our hearts, and that is there is something profoundly good and beautiful about marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and some of us are never, ever going to be ashamed of that or refuse to stand up to defend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We have a few minutes left, and I have some questions I'd like to ask our panelists. It's okay. It's not like MSNBC or CNN, so I'll just a few friendly questions. And I'll start, Jennifer, with you. You know, we've got a lot of folks here from across the country. What are some of the things that they might not know about the national marriage movement that would encourage them to keep standing up for marriage? There are some good things. What might those be?
Well, I think this has been a really exciting year for the Marriage Coalition working together, and one of the evidences of that you'll actually find in your bag this weekend. This What You Need to Know About Marriage booklet that we did in collaboration with the National Organization for Marriage, the Family Research Council, Focus on the Family, Heritage Foundation, and Alliance Defending Freedom. And this is just one example of the kinds of ways that we have been really honing our message and trying to make it accessible for everybody. We did this booklet so that you could take it, digest it, and have these conversations over the water cooler at work with your family. We need to really be talking about the case for marriage, and we all need to be equipped with it. The other thing I'd say that is very encouraging is that this year and the highlighting of the marriage cases at the Supreme Court has brought a whole new bench of recruits and young recruits to stand up for marriage on the national stage. You've heard from Ryan today, but there's Eric Teitzel at the Manhattan Declaration. There is Andrew Walker at the Ethics and Religious Liberty, Allison Howard at Concerned Women for America. And you know what the great thing was? For once, the press noticed. The New York Times featured this. The National Public Radio talked about their young recruits for standing up for marriage as a union of a man and woman. World Magazine, others. So this is important. This is not something that's going out of style. There are many young people committed, and they are being rallied by leaders like Ryan and others.
Related to that, Ryan, almost every time I do an interview on the marriage topic, I'm told, well, you know what, you're going to lose the next generation because all the polling says they're against traditional marriage, they're for marriage equality. Should I say, is the younger generation a lost cause?
Of course not. Of course not. This is what they said 40 years ago about the younger generation with respect to abortion. And what the past 40 years have shown us is that nothing could have been further from the truth. 40 years ago, they said that the young people weren't going to be pro-life, that the last pro-lifers would be the Pope in Rome and geriatrics in nursing homes. And what happened 40 years ago was that people put their nose to the grindstone. And we've had coalitions form, we had think tanks form, we had politicians like Ronald Reagan and Ed Meese, Henry Hyde, who used the bully pulpit, who created policies. Lawyers and activists got together, coalitions formed, strategies devised. My generation is now more pro-life than my parents' generation. And a majority of them... I shouldn't step on my applause lines, because that is a cause for applause. There's no reason why the same thing can't happen with the marriage issue. It's not that the young generation has heard the argument for marriage and rejected it. It's that they haven't heard the argument for marriage yet. When I go speaking at some of these secular liberal schools, even the people on the other side will come up afterwards and say to me, we've never heard a rational case for marriage. The students on our side say, well, I've always known it because the Bible says so, or the church taught me that. But now you've given me a philosophical and social science way of thinking about marriage. You've given me a vocabulary in which to talk to my secular classmates about marriage. And that's great. We have to equip our own people. But we also have to challenge the seculars and the liberals. And they need to understand that there is a competition here. There are two competing ideas of what marriage is. And there's no such thing as marriage equality apart from answering the question of what is marriage. And we just have to make that argument. But if we choose not to make the argument, then we lose the next generation. So the next generation is a lost cause if we don't do anything to help educate them. But once we do that, they're winnable just like my generation was on the life issue.
Very good. Thank you. Brian, you've got your finger on the pulse of marriage across the country. We've had recent marriage issues in Illinois. We've got things happening in both New Jersey and Hawaii. Can you give us an update on those states and what's happening?
Yeah, we're in for a tough fight. Look, we got to look at the lay of the land. The fact is that many states that could easily pass marriage amendments did so a few years ago, and that the states that are left are tougher states, and that's just a reality. But one thing that should give you courage and encourage you is the fact that states like Illinois, which has a supermajority Democratic legislature, Democratic governor, and a year ago, proponents of same-sex marriage said that same-sex marriage is a done deal. This is going through. That because of the work of the African-American ministers in Chicago and the fact that many Democratic African-American legislators have listened to them, up until this point, they've been able to stop same-sex marriage in Illinois. So that's going to come back. It's going to continue to be a live fight. But as of this moment, the lead sponsor of the bill to redefine marriage in Illinois says they don't have the votes. It's going to take a lot of work. People need to contact their legislators. But it's an applause. There should be applause for the fact that there's this new coalition of African Americans and others saying no to this. Hawaii is the next immediate fight, and again, it's going to be a very tough fight. Again, supermajority Democratic legislature. There's one Republican in the Senate in Hawaii, so it's a very tough fight. But again, there's immense pressure on the Democrats, especially from folks, a wide coalition of folks in Hawaii saying, don't do this. Now, the governor's called a special session. That'll begin October 28th. It's going to be a tough fight. I'm not going to deceive you, but there's been an upswelling of grassroots opposition. New Jersey, we have both the courts and an attempt to override Governor Christie's veto in the legislature. Now, Governor Christie vetoed the same-sex marriage bill, and he's continued to stand up for marriage by appealing court decisions that want to, by fiat, force same-sex marriage October 21st. That's going to go up to the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens. The reason all these state fights are important is because of Justice Scalia's own words in his dissent, which is a little frightening for our highest court. Him saying that the court is going to get away with whatever the court thinks it can get away with. It's critical that in each of the states, we do everything we can to show the court the people of this country, even in the deepest of deep blue states, are still willing to stand for marriage as the union of a man and a woman. That's why we think the state fights are very, very important.
Jennifer, let me ask you this question. You mentioned the coalition and the work of the coalition. What's next for the marriage movement and this coalition effort?
Well, number one, we have to keep vigorously making the case for marriage in the states that Brian has mentioned and across this land. It's going to be helping people understand that is going to protect the institution of marriage and law, and also make clear why this reasonable case for marriage deserves to be respected by our courts and our legislatures. That's critically important, and that's something that Congressman Labrador here in Washington has already recognized. He introduced a bill about a month ago that would protect individuals and groups who stand for marriages between a man and a woman and believe that sexual relations should be reserved for marriage from adverse federal action, like things like, for instance, having their tax-exempt status stripped from them. Why would we think of that? This is a threat that we have to deal with now. So that's a kind of, I think, protection and making the reasonable case for marriage will make it more likely that our religious liberty is protected as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. We're down to 1 minute. Ryan, I'm going to give you the last questions because I hear this quite frequently, about how, the Republicans need to move away from this issue. We need to quit talking about it. What do you have to say to people who suggest that conservatives and Republicans should walk away from the marriage issue?
I'll make 2 comments on that in the 40 seconds that I have. 1, it's a bad political strategy. And 2, it's a bad way to live your life. If you're going to lead your life in witnessing to the truth. It's a bad political strategy, though. It's a bad political strategy for exactly the reason that Brian Brown pointed out. We can actually attract new voters, new coalitions, by standing for marriage. The African Americans in Illinois aren't with us maybe on taxes, but they're with us on marriage. And we can help bring a broader coalition this way. What we saw in 2012 was that the 4 states that had marriage on the ballot, each and every state, marriage did better than Mitt Romney. In Maryland, the closest state to where we are right now, marriage got 48% of the vote. Mitt Romney got 36% of the vote. So there were 12% of the citizens of Maryland who voted for marriage but not for Romney. Why would we give up on marriage?
Ladies and gentlemen, again, help me thank our panel, Jennifer, Ryan, and Brian.